Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the podcast for the recently deceased. I am Nate Roberts.
And I am Rodney Godek. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right. I just renovated the store, so I've had two long, long days. My whole body hurts, but that's okay because I'm here with you now, and we're going to talk about two of our favorite guys. Actually, they don't know who we are, but we love them. So,
Sure. And you're obviously talking about Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson, who
yes,
have, I mean, we talked about them briefly when we had our episode with Jeremy Gardner and Christian Stella, the auteurs of After Midnight and The Battery.
yes.
And other projects, like they're sort of all in the same world or just friends and came from similar places or cross paths, but these two guys have such a unique filmography. A lot of them through Rustic Films, and almost all of them on Shutter currently. If anyone wants to research, which I highly recommend, but uh, they've been a part of the larger big budget stuff with Marvel, whether it's Loki, Moon Knight.
Yeah.
It's it's odd that they're somehow able to be a part of that, but yet also make these art pieces in their strange world.
Yeah, I loved Moon Knight, and I wonder how they were found and or approached. Um, that indie stuff you guys are into is really cool. You want to do Moon Knight? Like how did that happen? I mean, whatever. It was actually really good.
Yeah.
Especially with a pretty obscure character who, you know, what is he going to be doing in the MCU? No one really knows. But getting Oscar Isaacs involved, who's just this phenomenal actor, um, he really pulled it off. So anyway, we love you guys, and we're going to
Yeah.
talk about tonight. We're here to talk about something in the dirt.
Yeah. Something in the Dirt hit the film circuit. I want to say this was their first film to ever premiere at Sundance.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that that's accurate. They'd been in other festivals, but this is the first time that something that they had already that they sent to Sundance got accepted. And so it had been out for so long this year. I knew about it. The two of them, something in the dirt, their kind of stuff, sci-fi, trippy, mind bender type story, and waited and waited and waited and waited, and finally they started to release it in theaters. Obviously, it wasn't going to hit our locale, being where we're at,
Yeah,
but
never.
hit VOD recently, and we immediately snatched it up and watched it this weekend. And we are here today to tell the tale.
Yes, and if you're new to the podcast, what we like to do is give you a quick summary review with no spoilers from each of us, and then we're going to move on to a deeper, fuller conversation, which will be full of spoilers. So only continue to watch if you don't care about spoilers, or if you've already seen the movie, feel free. Otherwise, go watch the film and come back and finish the episode.
Absolutely.
So, without further ado, uh,
It's
we like
you.
to we like to read the and I got we're using a new format for the first time. We used to use Discord, and now we're
Ooh.
using Google Meet.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to bear with me for a moment as I
You pull up the
send
IMDb's.
you. There it is. There
I'm
we
excited
go.
for you to read it because I've already read it and I've got thoughts.
All right, and we kind of want to do one more thing here. Where do that? Yes, so it looks a little larger. Okay, and then one more thing. Hey, okay. Something in the dirt. Maverick filmmaking duo Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead offer up a twisted reflection of our paranoid times in this inventive mix of buddy comedy and sci-fi thriller. Directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, written by Justin Benson, starring Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. Rod, why don't you start?
So, I mean, we always comment on these blurbs, and I have to believe, and I feel pretty confident in saying that they had nothing to do with this blurb.
Oh, sure.
These guys are definitely not the kind of guys that would describe themselves in this fucking way whatsoever.
Sure.
They're very humble uh, and passionate about the art of what they do. They're down to earth, but they're not. They wouldn't write this, and I think it does a disservice to the qualities of the film of what might attract a viewer. If we're going through IMDb to see, oh, am I interested in this? This isn't going to help me decide whether or not I am. I already know that I would be because of them, but if I'm new
Right.
to them, this isn't selling me, and that's frustrating. Uh, but there's a handful of other producers, one of which is David Lawson Jr. He's also credited in the film, funnily enough, as the attractive man on cell phone. Uh, but I think the heart of this movie is something that ends at the end of the movie. They talk about make movies with friends, and my takeaway
Right.
when I first taught you is like that's what this film ultimately made me want to do. Is it made me want to write something with you
Right.
and film it. Uh, we can get into a lot of stuff with that and why it does that and evokes that, but I think that uh, at the heart, this is just two guys telling and something interesting or writing a story that's interesting to them that has a lot of openness to it, ambiguity, questions, deals with the fringes of uh, you know paranoia and what rabbit holes you can go down through isolation or life circumstance, coincidence versus fate. There's all kinds of interesting subtext in what they've made here that I don't think there's any wrong way to approach it or experience it. Whatever you get out of it, what is what you put in, and it can leave you questioning things or leave you feeling, yeah, open shut case. And I'm happy and content with the narrative that they told. But I think there's just so much more there if you want it, you know. And I think that that's ultimately what they're interested in as filmmakers is to just propose these things and let people play with it and make up what they want. And this film, I think, does an excellent job of it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was kind of just watching the trailer as you're giving your summation there, and the last quote, or like review quote, was, "I hope Justin Benson and Aaron Moore had never stopped making movies," and I I believe that was the first thing I said to myself when the movie was over. Was
Yeah.
um, I just really enjoyed myself. I enjoyed the movie. It wasn't what I expected or what I hoped for the show, but we have to do it because it's these guys, and it was so good. All I wanted was for them to never stop. Um, so what we were gonna check to see the cast and crew.
Yeah, I mentioned
Um,
David Lawson, but there's other people. It doesn't scream of it, but I do know that this was began to be written by the two of them during the pandemic when it originally occurred a couple years ago when the quarantine started. They kind of uh, filmed and wrote in the locations that are on this in the film. It was
sure.
those were their two apartments in real life, and so they used what they had available, and they
Oh,
wrote a
okay.
story. And then they realized as the pandemic was going on, and the more isolation and quarantining, where things weren't returning to normal, I think they decided like, okay, how do we keep our quarantine bubble and make this because it looks like we're in for the long haul. Um, and I think they do a good job of not making it seem like a quarantine film. We watched several that utilize the necessity of doing something like this podcasting where you just see people on one camera. There's no interaction with another character on a set. Uh, Night's End comes to mind as like the most obvious example. But I suppose like the host and things like that happen similarly. But at
Sure.
any rate, they do a good job, I think, of disguising that, like the fact that that's what was happening in real life doesn't really scream in this film. These are two isolated characters that aren't really interacting with anybody else, but it all works with the subject matter of the film and the events that are unfolding feels natural, and the narrow focus of the two of them in this closed environment is so purposeful that it doesn't feel like, oh well, it's because they had to quarantine, they couldn't have a big cast.
Sure.
It's very natural.
All right. So, what's the score?
Oh, my overall score, I'm landing at an 8 out of 10 for this one. I think that you mentioned the fact that it's like awkward for our channel because we're more so a strictly horror podcast YouTube channel, and that's valid. I think that this lives within that world, and that people that are fans of the horror genre will cling to this as something worthy of their attention and discussion, because there's a sense of dread or uncertainty or unease, anxiety with the events that are unfolding, because you sort of, they describe at some point what's going to be happening, and it kind of plays with that, and you're always wondering and guessing what's happening, and the idea of the supernatural or other phenomena, how that could unfold. you know uh what was the one, the fourth kind, I think, kind of came to mind as like, it's not strictly horror, but it, the potential of what could occur is there. And so I think that's what lets it live within that environment, and I'm so okay with us working on the tangents of what we do to discuss it, and especially because of the filmmakers themselves being worthy of it. So I'm at an 8. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to rewatch it. Especially, I'll get into it when we get into spoilers. But there's a lot of other texts that I came across years ago in my past that and help inform the way that I interpret the movie now and its place in film culture, I suppose, to
Sure.
be, pontificating about it, which
Hmm.
I'll probably do a lot of in this episode. So I apologize to anyone that doesn't like that part of the episode, but that's what I feel I'm prepared to do tonight.
Sure.
So uh, it's an 8 out of 10.
Sure.
Uh,
All right, for me, I give the movie a 7 out of 10. I think the 8 is totally valid. I only give it a 7 for it lacking, in the horror genre, which it unfortunately um, got billed at, as, and I can't help that, and I was expecting one thing, I got another, but the movie was fantastic, and um, for me, what I liked most was the the building of the paranoia from both characters' perspectives. Because you start off and you're like, okay, well this guy's kind of already wacko, right? And you're just kind of like waiting for him to spiral, and it kind of turns that on you,
mhm.
which I was really not expecting, and
Yeah.
I thought was kind of the some of the brilliance in the screenwriting was
Yeah.
kind of how it turned the character archetypes, on their head, especially when it gave you the setup for one story to unfold, and it definitely took the other fork in the road. Um, 7 out of 10. The story is so interesting, and I feel like, I don't know the references, right? And they do reference a lot of text and a lot of math, and and
Hmm.
and for someone who doesn't know, I was like, these guys did their research. like I like these guys know what they're talking about. So
Yeah.
so it was believable, right? Like um I didn't, furrow my brow at any of the pseudoscience,
Hmm.
that movies like this might have, especially stuff that this movie set up. Like they could have at any time, you know, portaled through the mirror in the closet to
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
time. You know what I mean? They could have like there were so many things they could have done at any time, especially with the fact that all that stuff was already there. The story could have wrapped around so that they put it all there in the past, and then they're finding it in the present, and then it's like one of those like time loop scenarios. Um, they could have gone into who wrote it all there in the past, and the stuff that was left for the next person to find, what happened to the last person. They set up a lot of stuff, and ultimately they don't answer any of these questions, but but we don't need the answers, especially
Right.
the way they ended the film, um, kind of ambiguously. You kind of get to write your own ending, which we sometimes you hate it, but in this case, I think it was done right. Um, so I'm gonna stop now before I say too much, and let's get on to the spoiler
Sure.
conversation. 8 from Rodney, 7 from me. Excellent movie. I suggest you go watch it as soon as you can. Make sure you give these guys some money too.
Yeah,
Buy it or rent
absolutely.
it or something.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, the rest of their filmography, a lot of it is on Shutter currently. Um, so real quick before we get into it, because we'll probably forget, the only other thing that I wanted to mention is the score to the movie is super uh, important and relevant because it really helps to create this film that's transformative and takes you to places that you weren't expecting and allows you to experience it and to approach it in a very unique and way that you wouldn't have traditionally had it been a more, I don't know, typical score. I'd say like there's the way that sound and music is used is very creative, and that's Jimmy Laval is did the music on this one. So for me, what I love about the film is, and you got to it at the end of the summary of what you did there, in that it's open ended, and I think that this film is meant to exist in uh, that sort of intangible uh, uncertainty of what it is and what was occurring and what did occur. And I mean, let's get right to it. Like for me, that that point happens in the film because all of a sudden this sort of mockumentary, documentary esque type filmmaking happens where they're interviewing other people and they're like, well, so let me ask you, why did you play yourselves in the
And
recreations?
the
And
recreations.
so, and you're like, have I been watching their documentary of these events the whole fucking time?
Right.
Because that changes everything and your world is flipped upside down. And fuck, it's such a. And from that point on, for me, I was always on uneven ground
Yeah.
and was never certain and got to play with things or just experience it. Like at that point it's like it like kicks you on your ass and you're kind of just like, oh wow, this changes everything. And you kind of, and you
Yeah.
like sit and you just like you it really adjusts the way that you approach it.
Right. Well, yeah. Okay. So you were watching two potential movies, right? You're watching a movie where you're watching the events unfold, and then it cuts to a documentary that was made sometime in the future. And it cuts back
Mm.
to the events, and then it cuts back to the documentary. Or you're watching the actual documentary, which includes all of the reenactments played by themselves. But those reenactments, they're reenacting like stuff that they shouldn't be reenacting, right? Like they're reenacting like conversations, just random.
Yeah,
The other,
and that's what's great about it because like that's the thing. And the 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 other piece that I'll bring in to help inform this conversation in a minute is like your memory is not the best framework upon which to build a documentary. Like you're remembering it a certain way and then you're probably repainting it another way in order to convey the message, but that isn't necessarily truthful to the probably the occurrence of those events. And so there's so many layers of uh, that are diffusing the truth of what occurred. It's morphing into something new and different that it wasn't from the start. And that it's that ambiguity and that discomfort or that lack of bearing with the
right,
film that just is it's so heavily soaked in it. And the two characters as characters and where they're at as people in the setting, it all just plays with one another because like that's them. Like those are two
yeah,
guys that are the way that the film is done and created. That's their lives right now, where it's like just waiting for something to latch onto and just go with it because
right.
nothing has occurred.
Right. Well, we see that too from like exactly what you were describing about not remembering things correctly, almost like you're playing a game of telephone with yourself. Um, with Aaron Moorhead's character, not Levi, the other one,
John.
John, uh, where he that happens or that he does that throughout the movie. Like you know the truth, and he kind of tells a just a little different version of it, just to make it sound better, with the way you punch up a story when you tell your friends, or the way
Yeah.
you misremember an event with a girlfriend that made you look a little better than
Mm-hmm.
it actually was, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And John does that through the whole film, and actually gets called on it in the I think the not the end, but the big fight between the two of them.
Yeah.
He
Yeah. The
calls him out
breakdown
on
of
it.
their
Yeah,
relationship at the end, for sure.
yeah. But once again, was that just a reenactment? Like, were they friends? And and are we? Is that dramatized for the doc?
Yeah, it's so bizarre because you really don't know. And for me, let me just ask you, I really almost throughout the whole film latched onto and sympathized with Levi
Yeah,
throughout the entirety of it. And I don't know if it was just so that his comedic timing and he had like the funnier one lines. There's something that I attached myself to him, and even when the revelations of his backstory kind of come up, I find and I'm like, ugh. I go along with the explanation of the events, but
sure.
that could be complete bullshit. And they're recreating that in the documentary, and it's
Yeah,
like, but at some point you just decide to go along with it, and that's fine. And I think that if you were to rewatch it, you could take perspective. It's like, okay, that's not okay, and this is now look at it from John's angle. So I sympathize with him, and so whenever he was like going after John or retelling John, like what happened with him, I found myself always attaching to him and taking his point of view or his perspective as the truthful one. By the time where he's incredulous and kind of like leery and uncertain to this phenomena that they're capturing, and he's like, we need to pull the brakes on this. Uh, but John wants to continue to go through. That's the rationale. He's like, yeah, this isn't a good thing anymore. It's not something we can capture. Uh, and that almost makes me think of. Do you remember Antler's Ant Holst from Nope, the filmmaker? He's like, you can't capture the uncapturable.
yeah,
The filmmaker from Uh, I feel like that's how Levi felt by the end of the film with what they were experiencing. Like, this isn't for us to fuck with. We kind of experienced it. We shot some stuff, but we got to move on.
yeah.
And I'm
Well,
gonna move on.
no, I totally agree. I think I also identified with Levi, and I also feel like he's the grounded one, and which is crazy because um, they're going to show him as kind of like he's always drinking. He's got the parole officer. He's got this sordid past. He's a bartender. He loses his job halfway through the movie. Um, so he's kind of this fuck up, right? Uh, and but he's grounded. Everything he says makes sense to me. He's like, he's
Yeah.
like, he's like halfway
Well, he
through.
seems the most true to himself. He knows
Yeah,
himself, and he's true to that character. Whereas John is more measured in how he interacts and how he goes about his interactions with Levi. He's more guarded and isn't as open or understanding of himself and his motives. He's not
sure,
open with it, where Levi is. Yeah, you're
right.
right.
Well,
Exactly.
that's what I like about Levi too, is where he says, you remember when you said we'd stop if this got scary? Well, I think it's time to stop. Like he's the only one willing to stop, right?
Yeah.
So John, who seems like he has his life together, in the beginning, we learn that he's living off his ex, right? He gets that check for
Mm-hmm.
like 3 grand at some point.
Yeah.
Um, and he acts like the adult, and Levi acts like the adolescent. But
Well, and yeah,
Every
and he treats him like that.
Yeah, yeah. But everything that Levi is saying is resonating with me, and everything John is saying is kind of like this guy's um, like just full of shit. Like
Hmm.
he's like lying, but maybe not really lying. It's like those, like I said before, those white lies that you're just like, you're punching up your stories or whatever, just to make yourself seem a little more important or a little better.
Hmm.
And he's manipulating Levi as well as he can, to continue because he can't do this alone or he doesn't want to do it alone. Once they get deep in, right? He can't do it without Levi. Levi tries to bail. He says no way. We're
Right.
just, um, yeah. The I mean, the movie's about these two people, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have the this excellent character work, right? From the
Oh
from the
yeah,
from
and
the writing
that's
perspective and the acting perspective, and obviously there have been friends forever as far as we know, and have this excellent chemistry, just as
yeah.
people, right? And the writing for them was fantastic, and the acting was excellent. So when you only have two people on camera, a lot like the battery, you know,
Hmm.
if they're the ones doing all the work, I mean, your movie's going to make or break based on those two relationships, and they did an excellent job.
Yeah, it's a lot like, how Tarantino finds himself writing these intense dialogues that are entertaining or insightful with just a few characters. Uh, and like this has to do the same kind of heavy lifting with the texts, with the dialogue between the two because it's so narrow focused. There's another part to play there, and I don't want to go off in the weeds with it, but like the way that the film is edited is so crucial to how it's presented and how it ends as a final product because it's so smart in in what it does with how it just misdirects you, but like fills you with this with history, with questions, with uh, feeling like you have all the answers, but then also have none of the answers. And all like they use their own found footage from their childhoods to impart on these characters that they're playing, and so they're now forever entwined. But it feels more realistic because of that, from a documentary perspective, which makes sense. Uh, so at any the writing and the way that they interact is so important. And what I think is so magical about the movie is like it's here's two characters, and now here's this impetus of an event, and how this potential brush upon a phenomena, if it even was a phenomena, maybe it was just this happenstance thing that they were both in a place mentally and emotionally where they were wanted to latch onto something. There could have been nothing there. And it could have been in their heads, and a lot of it just like kind of propelled and they fed one another. And the idea of paranoia and going down a rabbit hole and just tumbling like conspiracy theory type research where you want to find rational explanations for things that are the unexplainable, and what that drives you to, the madness that can occur, the obsession that occurs, and what it does to one another. And I think that they both become enamored with that, and they handle it different ways. But the film does just such a good job of showing that evolution or de-evolution of their psyches as it
Oh yeah,
progresses. The more insane the things go, the symbols and all of this, and I think that's what's so funny. Uh, and I'll just mention my text here in a minute. uh, is like you don't know what's real and what's not. All of what they're presenting, I don't think necessarily has to be truthful whatsoever, and I think that most of it isn't. I think almost all of it is bullshit. Some of it might be historical facts, but they're
yeah,
plucking it to explain or to work in their narrative, to make it make sense for the characters,
yeah,
and not that it's like a real thing. It's just
yeah.
it works.
By the end of the movie, they're on the seventh editor, and they've hired like
Yeah.
four VFX artists, and it's like okay, so wait, if we're watching the doc, like that last visual effects artist could have been the guy who did everything we've seen so far. Like
Right.
it's like
The
so
floating of the thing, like they're
the
just
yeah
describing it. We
yeah
that might not have been the real
yeah
event that
we
occurred.
weren't
We're seeing
watching
their
it happen in
recreation.
real time. Yeah, we're seeing the reenactment. We're not seeing the event.
And that, they have the other expert that talks about the lead levels in there, the chromium that's present, and what
Yeah,
that might do to a person. Like they could have just been on mind altering experiential type stuff where there was a
yeah,
light refracting on a window or the ashtray, and they
yeah.
fucking ran with
Right, because the first time he sees it, he doesn't really do anything, and then when it
it.
goes back to it and they're both looking at it, you see it like get up and spin, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, so
and
like
but that's
right
what's
there,
so
like that's the that could be the hint too.
and that's what's so I think fresh breathtaking. I'm thinking Mentos. Uh, that's what's so it's like a breath of fresh air, I suppose. With there's not a lot of movies that come out that play in this, dabble in this uncertainty or this ambiguous nature where you get to flirt around with whatever you want to, and you can latch on to what you want. You can go along with this or that, and you can interpret it in different ways. It doesn't happen a lot, and so that's for me. That's why it seems that much more impactful, because it really just plays in that sandbox and allows you to interpret and to guide your experience uniquely to yourself, and it doesn't direct you to one answer or one path. It's so open ended that you can approach and get what you want from it however you want. And that doesn't happen a lot in filmmaking. I think a lot, so a lot of it is so, narratively driven where it's from point A to point B and this is what you should get out of the film. This is like here, get what you will from it. Get a lot, get nothing. It's up to you.
Yeah.
And that's rare, I think, more so.
Yeah. I think we should mention the comedy in the movie.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's very dark, but it's also like there was a moment for me. It was like I actually laughed out loud, and when I watch movies alone, I don't usually laugh out loud. Um, so as we said before, like I'm right there with Levi. I'm in his head, right? And it's a scene where they're driving back from somewhere and they're talking about like the truth of this whole investigation. And and John says, yeah, and also because he's like just tagging the conversation with it. Yeah, and some of my figures may have been off. And Levi's like, well, how many? he's like he's like some of my figures were off. And I'm just like, because I'm starting to think like this guy's so full of fucking shit, like,
Yeah.
because he's getting worse. Like John de-evolves, he like nosedives, by the end of the movie,
Yeah.
like sweaty, crazy, paranoid, like gotta do this because this is all I have. Like if this doesn't work out, my
Hmm.
life is over. Is like
Yeah.
the feeling I get from this guy by the end. He's so desperate to make this a thing. And Levi, he's so carefree. He's just like, well, it was cool while it lasted. I just want to kind of move on to
Yeah.
the next thing. Like,
Yeah, like the story with the lobster, it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
like that's encapsulates him.
yeah, yeah,
For me the comedic, like it's an obvious comedic note, but whenever he's on the balcony and they're just drinking, hanging out, and the cops come by and he just like he times his beer to spill it so that it lands on the cops, and like it's an obvious comedic note because there's a lot of subtle, dry humor in it, but that one's a very obvious one. But it's hilarious just the way that he acts it, and then John's saying like, "What are the terms of your parole?" Like he seems so comfortable to do something so fucking stupid,
yeah,
but that's what's so enamoring about him as a character, where you're like,
yeah.
"That's great," you root for him. So okay, real quick, let me mention this text I've been talking about. So,
Yep.
in grad school years and years ago, I got really into the weeds with all kinds of shit with my friend at the time, but a lot of it was driven with like experiential type artwork. We were both MFAs. I was doing painting, he was doing sculpture, but we came across this thing called the Museum of Jurassic Technology. It's a an actual museum. It's in LA, but it's not like any other museum that you'd ever see or know about. Uh, and it's not necessarily about the geographic Jurassic or the period of the Earth's evolution, the Jurassic period. Um, it displays all kinds of different information, historical past. Some is factual and truthful, but some isn't. And you're never really certain what is and what isn't because it's all presented in the formality of what a museum experience would be to the painstaking lengths that one would go to craft a small vitrine with a small model of something so intricate and beautiful and precise, but it's about nothing. Like that is it's about a fake thing that didn't really happen. But because it's presented so seriously, you're like, well, wait a second, is that fucking real? And that's a very brunt way to describe the museum, but there's a litany of different vitrines. There's one about a bat that could go through uh, physical objects with its sonar, and so like there's this giant display that uses illuminations in the background, like your vitrines behind you. A light bulb would go on into one of the little cubbies, and you'd hear a narrator. Which, by the way, there's old fashioned rotary headsets, like handsets from telephones that are on the wall that you pick up and you hold to your ears to listen to someone narrate what's happening in the vitrine that you're looking at. And so it's like this weird analog way of interpreting the information, and then it has analog like light goes on here and you're hearing the narrator talk about this thing. And then it goes and goes and goes. And it's like all this labor to talk about this bat that is not real, but and then it culminates with like this visual of this bat stuck in concrete because the idea is they're going to try to capture this bat. They're going to make a wall so thick that it can't travel fast enough through it before its temporary uh, ability to penetrate objects subsides. And now it's encased in concrete, and they got it. They figured it out, and here it is. Let's present it. It's just so bizarre, but a long story short, there's a text that someone wrote about this museum and other things like it, where it's just that existing as a thing is a beautiful thing because it's like it takes something that should be, you interpret a museum as like a factual thing. I can go there and I know how to interpret this. This is all real stuff, and I learn from it. So whenever something does it like this, where you can't be certain, it puts you in this place where you ask more questions or you feel more inquisitive or there's this allure of not knowing the answer, and a lot of it is about like seduction, like in a romance or in a relationship. When there's questions or where there's somewhat uncertainty, that's where there's the most excitement and potential for something. And when there is no more questions and everything's just you just know it, like a lot of that excitement that originally occurred is now dead. uh, and so I heard Aaron or Justin mention the Museum of Jurassic Technology on an interview after I watched the movie, and it clicked all these memories that I had from going to that museum and then reading this art criticism text of the museum, and then but how it related to this film and the way that they did this film. To me, it all meshed and it gelled and it made sense with why it's important to create pieces of art that do that, because it puts you in a place where you can approach it differently or you can experience it differently. It's not something that you come across all the time because a lot of times there's different rules and everything, but playing with these rules is like a unique experience that you don't really forget often. And the only other thing that was related to it that I wanted to mention was this idea of the author of this one article talked about stone thinking, and I thought that that really made sense with like our characters in their like in that stone thinking kind of gives you this laser like focus, like imagine like whenever you're drunk or stoned or when you were like even the most simplest of objects can grab your attention, and you have this like focus with it, and you're like figuring it out. You're unlocking the riddle of this ashtray, because there's something that's engaged in your brain that has then allowed you to unlock the mysteries of it, and you're experiencing something. Uh, this film, I think, is like a version of that. Like what these characters went through was like this something in their brain was just engaged and clicked, and they did it in unison at the same time, and it took them somewhere. Uh, you know, to really dark places by the end of the movie, and man, just like having all of that in my background like made me, I think, engage the film in a deeper level, and that's what like left it where I did. And so man, there's a lot there. Like I wanted to send you the text, but I didn't think about it until like today, and it's a lot and it's really unimportant because it talks about random shit, but it relates to this film for me, and I appreciate you giving me the time. But
Oh
fuck,
yeah.
like long story short, it's just like it's an experience, and I think that the way that they made this, it's if this is what you're trying to achieve, I don't think that they could have done it any better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, uh, this movie subverted all my expectations. Kept me guessing all the way to the end, uh, and everything I guess was wrong because it wasn't because it wasn't necessarily supernatural or paranormal. Um, it was a documentary about some events, and whether those events happen or not, the movie plays out more about the character's journey together than it does
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
about the conclusion that you can draw from the events. And as a viewer, you're trying to guess and interpret the plot. You're trying to go, okay, so what is that glowing thing? What is that? Why is the gravity turning off or getting less or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah, his
Like,
weight, it was always getting, yeah.
yeah, its weight fluctuated. Like, so where is this going? Is this gonna be time travel? Is it gonna be an alien? Is it gonna be a
Yeah,
this? Is it
yeah,
gonna
the
be
way
a
that
that?
they were communicating with it with Ode to Joy in the
Oh yeah,
guitar.
oh yeah, yeah. That music sequence was great. It was so good. But once again, did that happen or was that a recreation? And if that was a reenactment, um, what actually happened that led them to the reenactment? Did they write all of this, or is it just some lead poisoning hallucination?
I know. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like the cactus that doesn't grow fruit grows fruit. They're outside, and there's a power station for the probably the traffic lights that are there, and it has a hum to it. He cuts the fruit open, and it has this pattern on it, and it's short, short, long, long, long,
Yeah,
short.
yeah,
And they hear the same pattern on the power station outside the house, and then they show the visuals of it,
yeah,
and they're like, "This is like what the fuck? No, this isn't real." But
yeah,
they present it so factually
yeah,
that you're just like, "Okay, I'll go
yeah,
along with that, I
yeah.
guess, because maybe it is."
Right. I'm here for the ride. Like what? Like where is
Yeah,
this? Where is this going? And it doesn't go anywhere. It literally just
yeah,
goes until Levi leaves, and you can't go any further because he's not there anymore. And okay, so then you have to wonder. Okay, it flashed that image of Levi crumpled up on the beach, right?
hmm
So
yeah.
does he float away and fall to the earth and die, or is that a reenactment? Do we see is that a computer generated image that we see for a split second because we're not allowed to criticize it from a filmmaking perspective, the documentary that John's releasing on his own because Levi left like he said he was gonna, right? They
Yeah, because it looks very much like a relatively shitty like graphic visual. Like it looks like almost
Oh
like
yeah, it
a
looked bad. It was
it
the
looks like
word.
a bit it looks like a
Yeah,
bitmap,
yeah, it's bad.
not a
It's very
JPEG.
bad CG.
Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah. It's very poorly made image of him crumpled up on
weird
the beach. Yeah,
angles. Like you
yeah.
remember the opening to It Follows.
Never saw it.
Oh well, shit. At any
Yeah,
rate, it's
that's
the opening scene. There's a character on the beach in awkward angles,
sure.
and it's very jarring. But it's realistically done. But it's also jarring because like that's not real life.
Right.
How would that happen? And so like I thought of it because it's like beach weird angles where he's like just like
Sure.
broken in. Uh, but yeah, so I still have not come to any finality with how I feel what occurred.
Sure.
I haven't. I took it at face value and like I'm looking forward to rewatching it to see where I felt because there's scenes where I feel that Levi's being interviewed in jail. You know, he's got that white
Right.
background and he's talking and it's like it looks like he's in prison
Yeah.
right now. And I could have sworn like I heard like a buzzer or a siren like of like cells like doors opening and
Sure.
closing because
Yeah,
they're
he could be in a
guarded.
mental hospital too. It's all white behind him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no fucking clue
Yeah.
because like the way that he was describing events seemed like okay, this is all after the events of the movie, but then the movie that John makes is this is the conclusion because he floated away. And it's just I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care because like playing in that space was the experience and that's
Right.
what I got and
Yeah,
it was
this movie
great.
is definitely about the ride, right? It's not
Yes.
you
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, you
Um
experience it and then you talk about it with friends. This is a
yeah,
conversation starter of a movie. I
right.
would imagine if I saw this at a festival with other fucking critics that are all into film and talking about film or had a Q&A with these guys after the movie, I'd be a pig in shit. It would be the funnest fucking thing to
Right.
get to do because it's this dialogue that is what's engaging and interesting about the movie and its ability to do that is incredible to think about from a filmmaker's perspective like that you could create capture lightning in a bottle in a sense not to like fucking suck these guys to completion here. I'm just saying
Yeah, yeah.
it's a unique experience that you
So
don't get every day.
we're only in for the
Fuck.
reach we're only in for the reach around, guys. We're not we're not dropping to our knees here or anything. Um yeah, this movie was so good. Okay, so you just said something that reminded me of another point. Yeah, you were
Hmm.
talking about how they were interviewed. And okay,
Yeah.
so early on, when only John has been interviewed, you hear someone say they reference the two of them, and then they say until the death. Um,
Yes.
and then so you're like, oh shit, does Levi die? Because you've already seen John. And then you see Levi get interviewed, and you're like, oh, who's the third person who dies? And now this is another fucking rabbit hole I'm thinking about the whole time. When I'm trying to piece it together, I'm like, who's the third guy who's gonna die? Who? Where's the time travel? Where's the alien? And I'm going nuts trying to figure this movie out. And
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, because it all seems like that was after the fact, but then the
Right,
movie happens and the documentary occurs that maybe John created, and there's finality to Levi no longer existing,
right,
and so
right. So where
fuck.
did the talking
There's
heads come from? Because the talking heads have to have come way later, right? So like, he can't have died that night and been interviewed, right? So like, so it is kind of John just making a movie.
yeah, because he wouldn't have had the chromium lead expert, the analyst of the soils, come if it weren't for after all the events occurred. He's now doing the Monday morning read through of what occurred,
Right.
uh, and so you're just left with more questions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they answer nothing, which is one of. So you're gonna answer everything. You're gonna answer nothing. Don't answer a couple questions. Don't be a jerk like that. Like they left us completely in the dark, and we'll take it. It was just that good.
Yeah. So, there's other films that it brought to mind. I don't know if you have a couple that you thought of during it, but the two that I wanted to mention, like, and I think they had mentioned this in one of the other talks, but different mockumentary, documentary type esque films that used horror as a vehicle. I think like Lake Mungo comes to mind. Uh, where you're sort of I think even The Bay I think used a lot of documentary where you're just like it as a vehicle to retell some of the events that you're now watching through found footage, I think is a really fun way to approach storytelling. And I think they do it really beautifully, especially in Lake Mungo. Although I don't think I was 100% fully satisfied with it. I wasn't rating things when I watched it, and so I might want to revisit it. But that, and then so the other one was Primer or Primer. I think I've mentioned this at least once before to you as a time travel type movie that's very lo-fi, similar type budget or restraints technologically that Justin and Aaron utilize in the way the film's made. But it's written in such a way that is really a head scratcher type movie. There's finality, I think, with how you approach the story. Not as open ended as this, but it's such a an unraveling experience that you're at the end. You really have to like sit and think and like process it. But I think you can kind of piece it together, but it's still fun because that it's like Inception, you know. But that's a more blockbustery one. It's not really
Yeah.
fair to throw that in.
Right, right. No, I didn't really think of other films during this movie. I was just locked in, and I haven't really thought to try to compare it to anything else. Um,
Sure.
I would like to bring up the cinematography.
Mm,
So with a mockumentary, there are things to expect, right? You're gonna get some talking heads. You're gonna get those. Oh, Primer is one of the most interesting indie sci-fi films I've ever seen," said Shaboy Tom. Shaboy the Tom. Well, thanks,
yeah.
Tom. Um, there's some things you're gonna expect. You're gonna expect some talking heads. You're gonna expect those reenactments, interviews, things like that. Um, one thing that I thought was excellent, excellent, like while watching the movie, and even now as I think back, um, there were scenes where the camera was placed like so perfectly to capture light in a certain way, or
Yeah.
to show where the two characters were standing, like background, foreground, with a like a wide, like, the canyon in the back, like you get the back, the like the valley of California, and they're up on the rocks, they're in the dirt kind of thing.
Oh yeah, with the fucking
Like,
fires happening in the back of the
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
hillside.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that shot, that scene was fucking awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
There, and just beautiful, beautiful shots in this movie. Things you would not expect from a mockumentary. So there's a lot more to to this than the screenplay, which we've talked about a lot. The script.
Yeah, well,
The
but that's
the
the
care.
thing, dude. Like, that's almost all entirely them. There wasn't a film crew. It
Yeah,
was shot by them. Like, they're the ones that
yeah,
are framing these things up. They're
yeah,
blocking. They're
yeah.
and I think it's that closeness that allowed them to really iron things out in a way that they felt this is the way that we want it to look because they can really keep going back and forth and have the time length of time where they're not on like a call sheet where it's like okay we have to hit this mark this mark this mark by end of day otherwise we're behind schedule and we're losing money. They
Yeah.
had the time to just set it up properly and capture the shot the way that they envisioned it. But yeah, you're right. We hadn't mentioned the cinematography before, and it's great because they utilize all the different visual tools, similar to how we referenced when Deadstream used the webcams appropriately.
Right.
This film utilizes the lo-fi quality of some of the camera work as a tool to like show like just the grittiness of the experience that they're having, because it's so lo-fi. Um,
Right. Right. Like when the thing's like rising behind the character who can't see it, but they're showing it to us from the security cam anyway.
yeah,
Yeah, that kind of thing.
yep,
Yeah, it was so you mentioned the score. We were now talking about the cinematography. Obviously, we've talked about the acting and the writing. I mean, this movie, you know, hits on pretty much every angle. It checks all the boxes. Tom, if you liked Primer, you got to check out Something in the Dirt.
for sure. Yeah, and I would say the rest of their filmography. plays like Primer does, and not to come to keep them as in the same lane on the same path, but uh, this film is very similar to Primer, and Primer's a lot of what they do plays in this kind of headspace. I've been having Endless on in the background. Um, Resolution, Spring is sort of outside of this kind of sci-fi trippy thing, but an amazing film with where Jeremy Gardner, I believe, does have a brief role at the beginning of it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. And then shit, Synchronic with I think Andrew Mackie, and so I think almost all of those are on Shutter right now. Highly recommend that you catch up and then let that be a reason to go watch Something in the Dirt, or let Something in the Dirt lead you to those other films, because there's even like little things that are in this film that tie in the other films that they made. Uh, it's not crucial to interpreting this film, but I think the universe that it lives within it kind of is a fan servicey type thing to know, like, oh yeah, this is them, like this is their mark. Although it's pretty obvious to tell from the way that this is done, like it's clearly just a Aaron Moorhead project. So
Right, right.
like they have a distinctive voice, which is again another unique thing. Whenever you watch a movie, and you're like, I know who made that movie. That's kind of a cool creative thing. Uh, so there's that.
Tom's picking up the movie right now.
Sweet.
um, Speaking of Jeremy Gardner, I believe next week on the podcast for the recently deceased, we will be reviewing The Leech. Is that
Yeah, I
correct?
believe that
Is it next
I
week
think
or the week
so.
after? I don't know. I don't know about the timing.
I think it comes out on the 5th, which will be Monday. So I think we'll have
Perfect.
time to catch it before we discuss on the 6th.
Excellent.
Pretty sure.
That's that's good news. Um,
Yeah.
because we are
That's just
huge.
supposed to be a Christmas time setting, but I don't know if necessarily like, it seems like a holiday movie. Which I'm looking forward to, because the other choices of holiday movie. So the Mean One trailer came out, which I don't think
Oh,
was. We'll talk about that in a second. But Violent Night, which is going to be more like Die Hard, but with David Harbour and Santa
as
Claus.
Santa Claus,
Uh,
yeah, and John
and
Leguizamo.
then, oh,
He's the villain.
okay, that's cool. And then Christmas Bloody Christmas, which looks like a Terminator Santa Claus. I don't know. So the Leech could be like the only Christmassy theme, but not like just like yanking on the dick of like a fucking Christmas property, or like not
Right,
really a
right,
Christmas
right.
horror movie. It could be the only true Christmas horror.
Will certainly
So
be
the
the
Mean One.
only elevated Christmas horror.
Ah. Right, Jenna Ortega. Did you watch any Wednesday yet?
No, I didn't, and but I love Jenna Ortega, and I can't wait.
Uh,
I heard Wednesday was really good.
yeah, I started it, but I was very tired when I started it, and I was really loving it, and I was like, I need to devote my attention to this. I can't just watch it as I doze. So I finished the first episode, but I dozed near the end, so I gotta get back to it. I believe I saw something. I think they never film her blinking. She's always
Oh,
wide-eyed, and you will never see her blink, I think, in the movie.
okay.
uh Something to pay attention to, which is just a cool little thing.
All right. So, any final words for the for something in the dirt?
No, I think, support small independent films. It took a long time to get this from the festival to finally being released. Rustic Films is bringing it to us. XYZ, I think, was one of the other distribution or production companies involved. um you know Independent movies and films like this are awesome. They do need to be supported, so please do that with whatever way that you're able to do so. I'm hoping that at some point we might be able to get to a festival in our area. That would be awesome, to travel to a festival and talk about all the movies that are at it. Because it just seems like it'd be just fun as shit to do. So uh, I think this movie thrives in that environment, and I'm glad that it exists. I want to continue to see it happen. I think that it's a good sign that they are still making this stuff, because think about it, dude. Like, if you had what I would imagine would be the money coming from a Marvel property
Sure.
to still make stuff like this while that's going on is pretty incredible, and just shows like it's the art of doing it and it's the act of doing it that they love. And I did mean it when I said it made me want to make something. I more so than I ever have in my life want to do that. So
Awesome. Well, keep an eye out, viewers, for for the first podcast of the recently deceased production. Because I've actually taking a film writing class online right now. I'm like halfway through it, and I've always fancied myself a writer, even back when I was in high school.
hey, did you ever see Adaptation?
That's the Nick Cage movie.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I know of it. I have not seen it.
Oh, you got to see it. If you're taking the film writing and we're talking about making a film, go see
Go see
Adaptation.
it.
Like
Okay.
you got to, yeah.
All right, we'll do, we'll do. All right, so I did want to say one thing before we go. There's no second episode tonight. That's why we kind of just went for it. We're over an hour. We haven't done an hour-long episode in a while. Uh, the reason being is I watched The Killing Tree, and I chose to spare Rodney the 67 minutes of his life that would have been him having to watch it. Um, so if you're listening to my voice now, do not watch The Killing Tree. As much as we are telling you to go support indie cinema, oh please God no.
I think I'm gonna watch just so we can talk about
Well,
it.
67 minutes is it's
It's
really
not.
not a lot
Yeah,
of.
that's not that bad. That kind of sold me on it. I was like, I could do that. I've done 67 minutes of worse things in my life. I can do this.
I can do that. All right. Rod gave it an 8. I gave it a 7. Check out Something in the Dirt as soon as you can. For the podcast for the recently deceased, I am Nate Roberts,
And I am Rodney God. Take care. We'll see you next time.
and we'll see you next week.